there was an overall circle of a blocky shape that formed an opening into a purple expanse. At some points, its blockiness was further in than one would expect a circle to be. At some points, it was further out. There began to be a light purple in the room. Darker purple colors settled on the floor, walls, and ceiling. I felt a warm movement, a tingliness build up, particularly on my head. And then the euphoria relaxing me, awakening me, loosening me. Adamson's quest starts with an illustration of one of those ridiculously dangerous stairways that one sees in some medieval and ancient monuments. And it spirals. And the guide for Adamson, he could only take him to get the gates. And Adamson knew that, okay, maybe drugs were going to get me there. But then again, this is not about drugs. There's the three things that he's supposed to obtain. And these three things might be said to be the gifts regarding mastery of fear, mastery of lust, and mastering the modes of one's mind. Maybe that's not it. We have the difference between the John-based pentagram rite and the Ezekiel-based pentagram rite. At this time, the Ordo Templi Astartes used the John-based one. And that would switch what is usually the northern quadrant and the western quadrant. So Ariel west and Gabriel north. One of the things that's talked about is that, why would the devils be in such long torment when they're finally trapped? Because supposedly the idea is that they would have, done something for humanity, the bring of knowledge. Well, there's more to it than that, but, this is a, thoughtful organization of the types of things that could be attributed to the Kabbalah. And they worked with Feraferia, and one of the things that they did do as a lodge was work through a few rounds of, going through the tree by astral projection. Volume 2, number 2, the summer solstice, ends with a chart about the seasons. Now, I would say, to talk through the chart, we have sunrise as a spring equinox. The fall equinox would be sunset. Between the, midnight, but also between, the no twilight time between dusk and dawn is the winter solstice represents that. The summer solstice represents, the middle of the day. And the cross quarter in May is, starts the latter half of the morning or something like that. The cross quarter of August puts things into the end, the latter half or so of the day. The cross quarter in November is dusk. The cross quarter in February is dawn. The autumn equinox issue shows someone leading somebody in scrying over a crystal ball. And sometimes one person will become more inert than another person. It's good for the operator to adjust their vision and let, the psychedelics and all that other stuff flow. And by psychedelics, I mean, the experience, the visuals and all that. But somebody staying still and just letting it flow is an important part of ritual too. People have always been afraid of secret societies, particularly since some secret societies have been used for criminal things, and there's been very vast networks of all that stuff. But for the most part, secret societies are just, to formulate an experience. Because like the magical secret societies, as a rule, you're not going to find anything that special in its information. You're not going to find anything that special in its objects or scenery or whatever. It all comes together to produce an experience in those who practice it. And sometimes the details that come through these things are things that, enable one to use a more detailed amount of the system. I have pointed out other information, made comments, even correcting some things about some societies, but that is not to say that there's not value in those societies or that, that doesn't work in such a way to them. Some of these people, I'm not talking about this in particular, but some groups, there's people that operate their system better than a more perfect or more detailed system. It also safeguards the method. It's like religion in general. The biggest problem with religion in general is that people, they don't have totally religion. They have a couple things, and those couple things out of context might cause some problems. The same thing goes with when you combine the forbidden, right? Now, this order does use alcohol, but other drugs are not, not their thing. And I think there might actually be exceptions to whether or not one has to use even alcohol in their ceremonies if one is to attend. We can play games with the number of letters and the number of values of letters and all that in pentagram rituals and other such things. But these sort of cosmological rituals are about connecting the lower and the higher, about representing a sense of reality. Some people literally may organize tarot cards. And there's an illustration of a neighbor of somebody holding magical ceremonies and is trying to figure out where this thing sounds interesting. Where's it? What channel is it on? It's like some people will have a spiritual business and operate their own orders and stuff like this after becoming a part, and that's fine. And there's a word of caution per se. Some things may be handed over to an order for private use, and somebody may violate terms that's not on the order, but you got to be aware of that stuff could happen. One thing about the chart at the end, same chart, is that what is the difference between an altar and a shrine, right? Well, some people say you should have 3 altars, right? You have your ceremonial magic, you have your ancestral and your devotional, or some other grouping of that, right? I had a Enochian altar. I had one with books and other. Enochian is sort of grimoire magic, you could say. I had one for other stuff. I had a table for other stuff, right? And but I made a difference between what I did in the East and what I did in the West. Volume 2, number 4 is of the winter solstice. What they call Phoenician characters, it's not entirely accurate, but you do have this idea of eternity per se. Father, mother, son. Sort of like you see talked about in Robert Gray's books. But then they talk about the triple and all that. And you have the dove and serpents. And, it's just a uniting sort of thing that cover indicates. Some people will reduce things into 2 symbols and make that a sexual thing. Other people will look at other important psychological landmarks of working Solomonic magic and stuff. Solomon, like Zarathustra before and Muhammad after, was a making one character, right? They were aware of the different cults and all that stuff, and they were inviting people to something beyond that, something that incorporates the balance of the both of them. I would not necessarily blame some of the things that go on in the Bible for, whatever. And there were reasons why, some cults didn't survive per se. And people like to say, oh, well, the other one was just, it's like, well, but look at some of the stuff they did. Some of it was violent, some of it was not entirely consensual or not consensual at all, sexual practices. It's just, oh, this person was chosen towards this and all that. But a vitality and a connection to life through the various opposites and aware of what is actually neutral sometimes is important. And the Church of Hermetic Sciences and the Ordo Templi Astartes doesn't want itself seen as satanic. It doesn't want itself seen as anti-Christian, if that's a less inflammatory term, because it certainly respects Jesus over Paul. And I, too, on my channel, make the argument very thoroughly and quite biblically at times that I favor what Jesus was doing over Paul. I do see value in Paul's working of stuff. And certainly they favor the Christian Kabbalah. I forget how to define things, how you spell things 3 different ways, and then it tells, as far as Roman or English letters, and it tells you what type of things are. And they favor the more picturesque version of the Kabbalah, the Christian or Hermetic Kabbalah. Well, I guess that would put it in 3 categories, right? And you certainly can tell by, this, that thing where you take the tetragrammaton and you add the letter sheen, like the Golden Dawn does. They're influenced by the Golden Dawn. You can tell by the introductory picture too. The selections from A True and Faithful Relation definitely whet the appetite in a period where there probably weren't selections printed for, over 300 years. And, you could visit a museum or a private collection and see some of the copies of Merritt Casaubon's book, but it wasn't reprinted until later in the 70s. And now it's been corrected. It's, I have a book that translates all the Latin. And now, not only the pictures were made available online, but you can actually get a reprint, or at least you did when I got mine, of the entire collection of John Dee's writings that pertain to the whole, Enochian and then some. I'm sure there's some scribbles or something. I get this feeling that something about Enochian back from the 1600s will be discovered, but it's more about the comprehensive practice, you could say. Some people make some issues about the quadrants and why the elements were put in such and such direction, and it made sense in what until 1948 was called Palestine, why these things are selected as such. Volume 3, number 1, starts with an illustration, and that spring equinox of 1974 seems like a cotton tree of life, and that root plant that's, what's that thing? It almost looks like a human, and I've seen pictures of ones that really sort of look like some sort of buried humanoid monster as the root. But it doesn't look like the top. It looks like the top is like supposed to be cotton, arranged as a 10-sphere tree of life. It might not be best for Lodge to focus on out-of-body stuff because it may not be predictable, right? And you want spiritual experiences that you can replicate repeatedly in a group, and ones that you can control. One should want to develop themselves, to be enlightened in a way, and not some sort of gatekeeping that, there's secret entities and ascended masters that our group has access to, and that's not really the point, is it? As you know, I was a member of an organization, and this corporation was, if you moved your way up the corporation, they would tell you just some little detail. There's a spiritual master with this name, and it has this symbol on it, or, it has this letter on it, or something like that. And, there's actually an extra temple, or there's a dome in this temple, or there's this in this temple, and it's like, and I was told, as you go along, there's a lot more of these details, and it's like, so they gradually throw in a little bit extra, but it's the same basic stuff that's public, and you don't really need to be part of an organization for some secret passwords or something. Kabbalah definitely generally operated like this. There was all sorts of details along the way that if you were exposed to it, then they would give you more information to work out and experience. And then if you worked out and experienced that, maybe you'd have a text and somebody else could expand it further, right? Uranome is given a context as if it's a personage of Ashtaroth, sort of a go-between, a lover of the great and the small. Poke Runyon came to realize that Aleister Crowley and his Book of the Law and stuff was not quite what he had hoped it to be. Definitely sees the value in that. He did present himself as if he ran something for a while. He was known as Brother Otterman, but he didn't want to be, he wanted some sort of society that was more than just the stuff that, was semi-public and, attracted just enough transients and stuff like this. They set up a bunch of flyers. They considered a lot of people, but there wasn't too many. But gradually, individuals came to make things more functional over time. And of course, the associate program probably had the most members that they had. But because the past 20 years and all that. But it's a small, tight-knit group. And it developed out of his trying to suppress symptoms of illness and surviving that came to the point where he just wanted to further develop his skills of mastering his body. But things aren't totally about self-mastery. They're not totally about one thing or another. Sometimes, after the founding of this organization, there's a few day retreats. Some people go off and do month-long retreats. And they get, I consider it like the Holy Guardian Angel thing. I consider it like, you're getting in contact with parts of yourself and having the different parts of yourself in contact with each other. There may be spiritual beings involved. I'm not saying that that's not the case. Certainly, I have encountered things doing retreats myself. And I have spent nights in this temple where I've seen some psychedelic stuff, but I haven't had communication yet in either this room or the other room. We have a poem and an illustration about advancing to higher man, as you could call it. We have the mystical realm from what you could say the pelvis down to the feet, with the fabled landmarks that relates to Adamson's quest. Then we have volume 3, number 2, the summer solstice, 1974. It's a sulfur holiday. The man, I guess, is being revived, and the woman is on display, but sort of a force of life, you could say. Joyous. I guess carrying on some of that spring energy we saw in another illustration. The goal of the Ordo Templi Astartes, the Church of Hermetic Sciences, at that point was to revive the sort of Rosh Hashanah sort of environmental, social mythology of a Near Eastern sort, a sort that predates the classical Greek stuff and the Israelites as a historical people. Structural material, gates, plant and animal mythology is where, some great secrets of magic lie. Of course, there's the mineral and the astrological stuff as well, but, that's sort of implied, right? And there's an illustration that harkens to the whole Golden Dawn sort of assumption of God forms thing. And I think the secret of, the joke there is that this person has totally gotten into form, even stepping outside of the constraints of, oh, well, I'm a human, and in this play I can't even think of myself as even something different. No, when you think of yourself as a being with a form that you can't even pose yourself in or whatever, it's not about methods, it's not about non-methods. You don't totally deny the spiritual, you don't totally deny the material. Or in a sense, you deny a sense of both, and then that gets you to the point.